My name is Sable Ardent, and I'm 33 years old. I'd driven 6 hours across 2 states, the trunk of my car filled with gifts wrapped in red paper and careful hope. I'd packed every box myself: Kayla's peppermint scented lotion, Dad's new set of tools he'd mentioned last summer, and a gold necklace for Mom that I'd found in an antique store window in Austin. I'd even baked cookies, triple sealed in tins, because this year was supposed to be different. I thought maybe if I arrived unannounced, the surprise might reset something old and broken. Snow had just started falling again when I parked outside their house. The lights in the living room glowed faintly through the curtains, yellow and warm. I sat there for a moment, watching my breath fog up the windshield, rehearsing the words I'd start with. "Merry Christmas. I missed you." Then my phone buzzed. Mom's name lit up the screen. Her text was only 6 words long. "Stay away from Christmas, you useless failure." I stared at it, certain it was a mistake. Maybe a missend, maybe one of those bizarre autocorrect disasters. But no, she meant it. There was no question mark, no follow-up, no apology. Just finality. I didn't reply. I didn't even get out of the car. I just sat there, the hum of the heater fading, the world outside turning white like it was trying to hide something ugly. Then I shifted into reverse and backed out of the driveway. I drove 4 hours without stopping. The radio kept looping the same handful of carols until even Silent Night started sounding cruel. Somewhere past the state line, I checked into a roadside hotel with flickering neon and a vending machine that ate my dollar. Dinner was a cold sandwich from a gas station. I ate it in the parking lot, still wearing the stupid green sweater my sister had dared me to put on, the one with the embroidered Christmas lights that actually lit up when you pressed the cuff. I looked ridiculous, like someone who still believed family could be fixed with gifts. Let me back up. I grew up in Missouri, in a house that smelled like old coffee and winter air leaks. My parents still live there. Dad hasn't worked in years. Mom quit her part-time job before the pandemic and never looked back. For the past 4 years, I've been their safety net, their invisible accountant, their personal utility fairy. Rent, phone, heating, car insurance, groceries. I paid for everything because they made sure I understood that love, in our family, was transactional. When I got good grades, they left me alone. When I got a scholarship, they took the credit. When I bought my first house, Mom cried. Not out of pride, but because it wasn't near her. I told myself I was doing it for Kayla, my little sister, 28 now. Funny, sharp, unassuming. The golden child who somehow managed not to weaponize it. She always thanked me, even when I knew she was embarrassed too. I helped her through college, co-signed her first lease, sent her money for textbooks she never asked for. This trip was supposed to be for her. She hadn't been home much either. I imagined us surprising them together, rebuilding something small, maybe even laughing over peppermint cake like we used to. Instead, I got a message that ended it all. By morning, I wasn't sad. Not exactly. I was hollow. Like someone had finally turned off the background noise in my head and I could hear my own thoughts again. I opened my laptop on the motel desk, logged into my bank, and started cutting ties. I removed my name from their joint checking account, canceled every automatic payment, and froze the emergency credit card I'd opened for them years ago. Then I called the internet provider and the electric company. When the rep asked for a reason, I said, "I'm done." That was all. When you spend your whole life bailing people out, you start to think of it as love. But love isn't supposed to feel like debt collection. Christmas morning, my phone buzzed again. It was Kayla. She was at the house, sitting alone in the living room. "No decorations," she wrote. "No food. Mom said Christmas is canceled because you think you're too good for us." I typed and deleted a dozen responses, then finally, something came up. She sent back a single line that gutted me. "This place is so cold." Later that night, I got a new text. This time from Mom. "Please fix this." No context, no apology, just a command, like she was ordering from a menu. I stared at it for a long time. Then I turned the phone off and laid it face down on the nightstand. I wasn't angry anymore. Not yet. Something colder had settled in, a kind of stillness that felt like the beginning of an ending. When I finally turned the phone back on the next day, it lit up with chaos. 8 missed calls from Mom, 3 from Dad. A string of texts that started with, "You need to grow up, move through," after everything we did for you, and ended with, "Don't expect a family when you're old and alone." Predictable, almost boring in its cruelty. I put the phone down, slipped on my coat, and walked outside. The air was sharp, smelling faintly of salt and exhaust. I wandered through the little downtown nearby, coffee shops glowing with string lights, families holding shopping bags from post-Christmas sales. Everyone looked normal. No one was disowning anyone in a motel parking lot. I wondered how many of them were just pretending too. By the time New Year's came, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going back. Not to Missouri, not to that house, not to the role they'd written for me. The fixer, the wallet, the daughter who kept everyone comfortable. The decision felt strange at first, like deleting a part of myself. For years, I'd measured my worth in the number of times I saved them. Each payment was proof that I still mattered. But every rescue had been a slow rot. I didn't realize until I stopped how heavy it had become, carrying two adults who never learned how to stand. The first week of January, the fallout began. Their heat went out, then the internet, then the car insurance lapsed. I didn't do anything. I just watched the dominoes fall, one automatic payment at a time. Kayla texted me now and then, worried. She said Mom was snapping at everyone, Dad was sulking in the dark, and they were blaming each other for bills that were never paid. She asked me if I was okay. I told her the truth for once. I'm better than okay. I'm done. And for the first time in years, I slept through the night. But peace doesn't come quietly in our family. It comes like an echo. The louder the silence, the more desperate the noise that follows. Because by the end of January, I wasn't just cutting them off. They were about to find out what it means when the person holding the safety net finally lets go. The silence the day after New Year's wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that hums, like a power line in winter, waiting to snap. I woke up to the motel heater rattling against the wall and a phone full of notifications that felt less like messages and more like a script I'd already memorized. Dad's text came first at 8:04 a.m. "You're being dramatic. Grow up." Followed by my sister's. "You've always been the outsider anyway. Why are you acting surprised now?" And finally my mother's, which was the crown jewel. "You think we owe you for things we never asked for. You're not a martyr, Sable. Stop playing the victim." I stared at the words long enough for the letters to blur, then turned the phone face down. The motel ceiling had a hairline crack that ran like a map toward the window. I watched it for a while and thought, maps lead somewhere, scripts don't. I made coffee in the tiny machine that always tastes like old pennies in plastic, opened my laptop, and checked the things I'd already set in motion. The internet at their house was scheduled for termination. The autopays were canceled. The emergency card was frozen. The utility portal still listed me as a contact, so the system pinged me whenever a payment failed. It pinged me like a heartbeat. That afternoon, the electric company sent the first alert, past due. In the evening, the car insurance company mirrored it, lapse due to non-payment. I didn't have to lift a finger. Their entire system was built on the assumption that I would always be there, quietly, invisibly, turning the gears. I had simply stepped away. Kayla texted around noon from under a blanket in the living room. No heat, just space heaters in 2 rooms, because the rest was too expensive. She sent a photo of her breath fogging in the air, like the house was exhaling its last bit of kindness. "You okay?" she asked. I typed longer than I sent. Finally, "I'm okay, for once." She wrote back, "Mom's acting weird. Not angry weird, scared weird." Then, "You weren't bluffing, were you?" I told her I wasn't. I also didn't tell her that I was shaking while I typed, not from doubt, but from the cold thrill of finally doing the thing I'd promised myself 100 times and never managed. The heater banged like it was applauding. I didn't call my parents. I called Aunt Lee. She answered on the first ring with her voice like a spare blanket. I told her everything, the driveway, the text, the gifts in my trunk, the hotel. She didn't interrupt, didn't try to varnish anything with sentimental glue. When I finished, she said, "It's about time," like she'd been holding the phrase between her teeth for years. Then she said something else, quieter. "Your mother's been lying about money for a long time, but it's not all hers. Your father's pride is a hungry thing." I felt that in my bones. I told her about the patterns, the little miscommunications that always landed in Dad's favor. Bills that never arrived, passwords that changed themselves, mail that got lost, but somehow ended up in his desk. Lee hummed, a low sound like she was flipping pages I couldn't see. "Keep your receipts," she said. "I've kept mine." The next morning, a voicemail from Dad landed like a politician's handshake. He sounded reasonable, which is to say practiced. "Things are difficult," he said. "Maybe we should have a family conversation before things go too far." He mentioned the house, how they might lose it, how they just needed a little help to get back on track. There was that assumption again, like the world owed them softness, and I was the one withholding it. I didn't call back. I called Kayla. We talked for 2 hours about everything except what we were really talking about. She told me Mom had canceled Christmas in a huff after my no-show, told me Dad sat in the dark like a statue, told me they'd started snapping at each other over small things because small things were all that remained. "She's not mad at you," Kayla said. "She's scared because she finally realized you weren't bluffing." The words pierced and settled. Fear is what people call injustice when the person they trained to save them stops showing up. By the end of the week, the messages from extended family trickled in like weather reports. "Your mother says you've been emotional lately. Your father says you're unpredictable." Unpredictable was their favorite word for me when I set boundaries. It meant, "We didn't see this coming because we never imagined you'd stop." I stopped protecting their image. When Uncle Martin called asking about family tension, I said, "They told me to stay away from Christmas and called me a failure. I am simply honoring their request." He made a small noise and said he hoped we could all move on. I told him we were, just not in the same direction. That's when Aunt Lee got louder. She had always been the quiet one, the aunt who slipped me $20 bills and packed me leftovers without making a show of it. But now she started speaking with the weight of someone who kept records. She told my mother the way she talked about me was disgusting. She told my father that pride is not a budget, and that if he wanted respect, he could start by respecting the truth. When they tried to guilt her, she said, "I have screenshots. It's amazing how quickly people stop pushing when you tell them you've brought the receipts." The day after Lee's warning shot, the weather changed. No more voicemails, no long texts about family or forgiveness. Just quiet, the kind of quiet that happens when someone is building a new angle. I went for a walk downtown past a window display of paper snowflakes and a cardboard moose in a scarf. When I came back, 2 plain envelopes were waiting at the motel desk with my name on them in an unsteady hand. No return address. The clerk said a woman dropped them off. I took them to my room and set them on the bed like evidence. I opened the first one. The letter said it was from Mom. The apologies were smooth, but strangely distant, like she was reading an article about regret rather than feeling it. She explained how the holidays were emotionally complicated, how things were said in the heat of the moment, and how I had misunderstood the intent. I read it again, then a third time, and realized what bothered me. Mom always rammed her sentences together. This letter breathed too often, paused in places Mom never would. It also erased Kayla entirely. No mention of how she'd been used as collateral. No mention of the lies told to aunts and cousins. Just a soft nudge toward forgiveness, as if my boundary were the misunderstanding. I set it aside and opened the second letter. This one said it was from Dad. It was clipped, efficient. "Your mother hasn't been well since Christmas. She's sleeping more, forgetting things. You've made your point, but she's not well, and I can't do this without you." The line was designed for hesitation. It worked. I stared at it until my eyes watered from the cheap motel lamp, then called Kayla. "Is Mom sick?" I asked. She hesitated. "Maybe. She's been off, slower. She went to the ER once, but left before tests. She's forgetting small things, my class schedule, my middle name." We both laughed, not because it was funny, but because that particular forgetfulness had always been the family's trick. You're misremembering, you're overreacting. This isn't how it happened. "It's bad," Kayla said. "I don't know how bad." I sat with that a long time. After everything, I still wasn't heartless. If she was sick, if this was real, I couldn't live with not seeing it for myself. Against the better judgment that had finally started to grow in me like a spine, I packed, checked out, and drove 12 hours to Missouri through a sky that wouldn't decide between snow and rain. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want a conference call. I wanted the truth in a room. The house looked smaller than memory, the yard a tired mouth under a dusting of frost. A couple of trash bags sagged on the porch like failed intentions. I knocked. When nobody answered, I used the spare key I'd never returned because some part of me had always assumed they'd need me in an emergency. The heat was turned low. The air smelled like old coffee and something metallic. Footsteps in the hallway. Mom appeared in a blanket, hair pulled back, sleepy eyes. For 1 second, everything in me unclenched. She'll cry, she'll apologize, we'll finally say the right words. "Why are you here?" she asked. Not unkind, but not kind either. "Are you okay?" I asked. She blinked. "I'm fine. Why are you here without telling me?" I told her I got her letter. She frowned like I'd misnamed a neighbor. "What letter?" I took the envelope from my bag and handed it over. She looked at it the way people look at menus they can't read. "I didn't send this," she said. "I didn't know he sent anything." The sentence slid into me like a pin and burst the last bubble of doubt. The voice of the first letter wasn't hers. The cadence was wrong. The second letter's urgency had been too pointed, too timed. He'd written both, faked her apology, manufactured her illness as bait, tied a guilt ribbon around it, and waited for me to pull. I told her I had to go. She didn't stop me. In the car, I drove 5 miles to a Walmart parking lot, put the seat back, and stared at the roof until it turned from gray to black. It wasn't rage that arrived. It was something emptier, a quiet recognition that I'd just watched the last mask fall. The person underneath wasn't who I'd been arguing with all these years. He was worse. He was exact. I called Kayla the next morning and told her everything. She didn't sound surprised. "He's been saying different things to each of us," she said, telling me one story, telling Mom another. "He even told me not to give Mom my bank info because she's slipping." The word quivered between us. Slipping as in losing memory, or slipping as in losing control of a narrative he couldn't afford to let go. I hung up and texted Aunt Lee. "I need you here." Her reply came fast. "On my way. Bring your spine." I laughed for real, then stopped, because even with Lee's steel and Kayla's clarity, I felt the old pull, the undertow of roles I'd finally shed. He was escalating. The quiet was over. When it breaks, it never breaks alone. Aunt Lee didn't warn anyone she was coming. She just arrived, no announcement, no calls, on a gray Saturday morning that looked like it had forgotten the concept of sunlight. She drove the same dented Toyota she'd had for 20 years, parked it crooked in my parents' driveway, and stepped out like a storm that had been brewing quietly for too long. Kayla was already there. She'd stopped by with groceries, small things she could afford, just enough to keep the fridge from echoing. She told me later that when Lee knocked, Dad answered the door, and the color drained out of his face so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug. He wasn't expecting her. "Let's talk," Lee said, voice low, even, lethal. He tried to smile, the same way he always did when charm was cheaper than honesty. "Lee, this isn't a good time." "I'll decide that," she said, and walked past him like she owned the place. She went straight to the kitchen table and set down a thick manila folder. Kayla said it hit the wood with a sound that didn't belong in that house, something final. "Sit," Lee told him. When he didn't move, she repeated it. "Sit." He sat. Inside that folder was a decade of evidence. Printouts, bank statements, screenshots, even copies of checks she'd requested from the bank under family record audits. Lee had always been meticulous, the kind of woman who balanced every penny and saved every receipt. She'd noticed things years ago, but never wanted to believe them. Now she had no choice. One by one, she laid them out. Payments I'd sent that never arrived. Withdrawals from accounts Mom didn't even know existed. Credit card statements in Dad's name using Mom's identity. Checks written from her personal savings to his. Thousands of dollars, all signed in his cramped handwriting. When Mom came in from the hallway, Lee didn't stop. She just looked at her and said, "You should sit too." Kayla said Mom's hands were trembling as she lowered herself into the chair. "What is this?" she whispered. Lee's tone softened, just barely. "Proof." Dad's mask cracked. He leaned back in the chair, jaw tight. "This is a violation of privacy," he said, like that was the moral offense here. Lee didn't blink. "You violated everyone's trust. This is me catching up." He looked at Mom, hoping she'd side with him the way she always did. But this time she didn't. She just stared at the papers, at the loops of her own forged signature, her own name written in someone else's intent. Kayla said the silence after that was heavy enough to feel like pressure. Mom started blinking too fast, breathing shallow. Is this real? She asked. Lee nodded. All of it. That's when the realization hit her. All those little lapses she'd been blaming on age, all the missing mail, the accounts she couldn't log into, the passwords she must have forgotten. None of it was her. He'd been doing it, slowly, systematically, draining her account, redirecting mail, making her think she was slipping when she wasn't. She wasn't sick, she was being erased. Kayla told me later that Mom didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She just started crying, quietly, like someone exhaling years of disbelief. Lee stayed steady. You've both hurt people, she said, but one of you's been bleeding the other dry. Dad stood up suddenly, chair scraping the floor. You don't understand, he said, voice shaking now. You don't know what it's been like. She doesn't handle money well. She forgets. She trusted you, Lee cut in, and you used that to make her doubt her own mind. He slammed a hand against the table, rattling the papers. I did what I had to do for this family. Kayla said Lee just looked at him with this terrifying calm. You mean for yourself, she said. He didn't answer. He just walked out of the room, into the kitchen, and slammed the door so hard the picture frames on the wall rattled. The house stayed quiet for nearly half an hour after that. No one moved. No one spoke. Mom sat there staring at the folder like it might start explaining itself if she just looked long enough. Finally, she whispered, How long? Lee said, Years. That was when the flood started. Questions, half-thoughts, disbelief, grief. Who had been paying what? What was really happening? What had he told the rest of the family? Kayla tried to explain everything she knew, starting with Christmas. She told her about the text, the trunk full of gifts, the letter I'd received, the drive I made just to check on her. When she got to the part about Dad faking the letters, Mom pressed a hand to her mouth and shook her head. No, he wouldn't. He did, Kayla said. And that's when Mom cried again, real tears this time. Not the dramatic kind she used to pull out during fights, but quiet, raw sobs that came from somewhere deeper. She didn't ask anyone to stop her. She didn't try to justify anything. She just sat there with her hands over her face, shoulders trembling. A few hours later, Lee called me. Her voice was steady, but I could tell it was the kind of steadiness that takes work. It's done, she said. I was sitting in my car outside a diner when she said it. I didn't ask what done meant. I just listened. Your mom knows everything now. He didn't deny it. He left, packed a bag, and walked out. I waited for the satisfaction that should have come with that sentence, but it didn't arrive. Just a low hum of fatigue. She wants to talk to you, Lee said. For real this time. The words sat heavy in my ear. Part of me wanted to say yes, to drive back, sit at that same kitchen table, and finally hear an apology that didn't sound like strategy. But another part of me, the one that had driven away that night, the one that had stopped paying bills and stopped bleeding for people who never thanked me, knew better. I closed my eyes. I can't, I said. Lee was quiet for a long moment. You sure? I am. I can't go back there just because the villain changed costumes. That's fair, she said softly. You did your part. After we hung up, I sat there until the diner lights flicked off for the night. I watched couples walk to their cars, their breath visible in the air, the world going on like it hadn't just shifted beneath my feet. The next morning, Kayla called. Her voice was raw, sleep-deprived. Mom wants to make it right, she said. I know. She's different, Sable. You don't have to forgive her, but you could at least. No, I said quietly. She stayed. She saw what he was doing. Maybe not all of it, but enough to know something was wrong, and she stayed. Kayla's breathing hitched. You sound cold. I sound done. There was a long silence, the kind that feels like a bridge burning between you, plank by plank. I didn't expect you to mean it, she said finally. Neither did they, I whispered. That was the last real conversation we had. After that, there were only texts, short, careful ones that felt like strangers pretending to be family. I didn't go back. I didn't even tell Lee goodbye in person. I just drove until Missouri was behind me again and the sky started to open up. But the quiet that followed wasn't peace. Not yet. It was the sound of everyone rearranging their guilt, trying to decide who to blame now that I'd stopped being the problem. In the weeks that followed Aunt Lee's confrontation, the story inside my family twisted again, the way it always did when the truth became too heavy for them to hold. Mom called Kayla almost every night, voice fragile and apologetic. like someone trying to remember what honesty felt like. She told her she'd been going through boxes, finding old bills, credit card statements, bits of proof that confirmed what Lee had shown her. At first, she spoke with shame. Then slowly, her words shifted, like she was rewriting the script. By the end of one call, she was saying, "Your father fooled us all," as if she hadn't been sitting beside him for every lie. Kayla relayed everything to me over text, then calls, then eventually nothing at all. The pauses between our conversations stretched longer. I knew what was happening. She wanted reconciliation. I wanted distance. We were pulling in opposite directions across the same bloodline, and it was only a matter of time before something tore. When Lee called a week later, her voice was low but firm. "He's gone," she said. I was standing in line at a grocery store when she told me. Gone? He packed what he could, drained what was left of their savings, and left town. No forwarding address. No apology. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it just felt quiet. Mom was trying to recover, Lee said. Going to counseling, meeting with an attorney, trying to secure the house. She wanted to talk to me, not to beg for money, Lee promised, but for forgiveness. But forgiveness was a currency I didn't trade in anymore. That night, I sat in my apartment with the lights off, scrolling through old photos of us. Me, Kayla, Mom, Dad. A Christmas morning from 15 years ago. Mom holding a mug of coffee, Dad with his arm around her. Kayla and me wearing paper crowns from cheap party crackers. The image looked harmless, even happy. But I remembered the fight before that photo was taken. The argument about how I'd bought gifts that made him look bad, how Mom told me to stop trying to embarrass them with success. It had always been there, the rot behind the wrapping paper. Lee called again a few days later. She really wants to talk, she said softly. I'm not going, I told her. She's not asking for money. I know, but she's still asking for something. Lee sighed. You're not wrong. Then, after a pause, you know, she's finally seeing what you were trying to say all these years. Maybe, I said, but now she gets to feel enlightened while I'm still cleaning up the ashes. Lee didn't argue. She just said, I get it, Sable, truly. But at some point, you'll have to decide what peace looks like for you. Because silence and peace aren't always the same thing. I didn't answer. That evening, Kayla called. She didn't bother with greetings. She's different now, Sable. Different how? She's trying. She's actually listening. She cries when she talks about you. I almost laughed. She's cried before, usually when someone else was watching. Kayla's tone hardened. Why are you being like this? Because crying doesn't undo what she did. It doesn't change the fact that she watched him do it and said nothing. She was scared. She was comfortable, I corrected. Scared people run. Comfortable people stay. There was a long silence. Then Kayla said quietly, I guess I didn't expect you to sound so cold. I guess I didn't expect you to keep making excuses for them. She didn't reply. We didn't talk again for weeks. Then, late one night, my phone buzzed with a message from her. Mom's in counseling. She's been journaling. She's trying to fix things. You're the only piece missing. That word, piece, stuck under my ribs, as if I were part of a puzzle I never asked to be in. I typed a reply, then deleted it. The next day, Lee called again. I could hear fatigue in her voice. She's making progress, she said. She's trying to own her part. She should, I said flatly. I think you should hear her out. And I think everyone keeps confusing closure with access. Lee went quiet for a moment. You know, Sable, sometimes forgiveness isn't about them. It's about not letting them live rent-free in your head. I wanted to tell her they'd never lived rent-free. I'd paid the mortgage, but I didn't. I just said, I'll think about it. That night, I dreamt about the folder, the paper spread across the table, my mother's face as she realized what he'd done. But in the dream, she wasn't crying. She was looking straight at me and saying, You let it happen too. I woke up sweating, heart pounding, the words still echoing. Maybe it was guilt, maybe just exhaustion. But I couldn't shake the feeling that in trying to end the cycle, I'd just created a new one. Silence, distance, bitterness. A quieter form of the same disease. A week later, another email arrived. Subject line, talk. It was from Mom. The body of the message contained only one sentence. I know I failed you, but I never stopped loving you. I stared at it until my eyes blurred. That was the problem. It was never about whether she loved me. It was about how little that love ever protected me. Love that doesn't shield isn't love, it's ownership. I deleted the email, not out of anger, out of self-preservation, because I knew what would come next. The flood of guilt, the emotional leverage, the narrative of, You're the bigger person. The cycle was spinning again, and I refused to step back inside. In the following days, the air around me changed. Family group chats went quiet. Cousins stopped replying. A coworker who followed me on social media left a comment on one of my photos. Family is everything, even when they're hard to love. I almost replied, not when they make love a weapon, but I didn't. Some wars don't deserve witnesses. By spring, I'd gotten used to the quiet. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was mine. And for the first time in my life, mine was enough. By spring, the quiet had changed its tone. It wasn't the tense kind anymore, not the silence of waiting for the next hit. This one was heavy, but clean, like air after a storm. I could finally hear myself think. And for the first time in 33 years, the voice in my head didn't sound like anyone else's. I filled the space they left behind with small, ordinary things. Morning walks through the park, a new plant that refused to die, work that didn't leave me drained. I started sleeping again. Real sleep, the kind that doesn't brace for a midnight phone call. My apartment still felt too empty sometimes, but I liked the sound of it. The click of my own keys in the lock. The stillness that didn't demand apology. Then, one afternoon, I got a letter. No return address. Just my name, written in careful, deliberate handwriting that looked vaguely familiar, but not recent. I stared at it for a minute before I opened it, half expecting another apology, wearing someone else's face. But this time, the name signed at the bottom stopped me cold. Mrs. Langford, the same woman who'd taken my seat at the table that Christmas. She wrote that she'd seen an article about the company I'd started with a few friends, a small consulting firm that was quietly doing well. She said she hadn't known how bad things had been, that she'd always felt uncomfortable that night, but hadn't wanted to cause drama. She apologized for not saying something sooner, for not realizing what was happening, for letting herself become a prop in someone else's humiliation. And then, the part that made me set the paper down and laugh, half in disbelief. If you're open to it, I'd like to refer some of my clients to you. You deserve better business than the kind that trades in guilt. At the bottom, tucked between the pages, was a small Christmas card. No names, just a watercolor pine tree and a line written in her hand. Next year, no furniture trades. I sat there for a long time, smiling at the absurd honesty of it. When I showed the letter to Aunt Lee, she snorted so hard she almost spilled her coffee. Guess the universe still knows how to write punchlines. Later that evening, I told Kayla about it too. She laughed softly, then went quiet. I'm glad someone finally said sorry, she said. Yeah, I answered. Me too. It wasn't from the people who should have, but maybe that's why it mattered more. A few months later, the news reached me through Lee. The house was gone, sold off under pressure, debts finally swallowing what was left. My father was living somewhere in Arkansas with a new girlfriend. My mother had moved in with a cousin in Illinois. Kayla had taken a job out west and was thriving. We didn't talk much anymore, just the occasional text. Saw this and thought of you. Hope you're well. Every message shorter than the last. I didn't blame her. We were both still learning to live in the fallout of truth. Sometimes, when I walk past a shop window and catch my reflection, I almost don't recognize the woman looking back. She doesn't flinch at her phone lighting up. She doesn't feel small when she says no. She's finally stopped explaining herself. I used to think cutting ties would feel violent, like detonating a bomb, but in reality, it was quieter. More like the slow collapse of a building that was already hollowed out, one I'd been propping up with the beams of my own spine. Everyone talks about forgiveness, like it's a moral requirement, but no one tells you how to forgive people who never stop pretending they did nothing wrong. They call you bitter for remembering, difficult for not returning. They rewrite the story until you're the villain for walking away from a burning house. Let them. I don't need to correct them anymore, because I've learned that peace isn't something you win through confrontation. It's what grows in the space where you stop needing approval. My new company was small but steady. Work came from referrals, some of them, ironically, from Mrs. Langford's network. Every invoice paid on time, every client grateful. No manipulation, no guilt, no phone calls pretending to be emergencies. Just clear agreements and clean endings. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the city skyline, I opened my desk drawer to put away a file and saw the pine tree card again. I'd kept it beside an old photo, Kayla and me as kids, sitting on the porch eating candy canes. For a moment, I imagined that version of us again. Two sisters untouched by family lies, unaware that love could ever come with receipts. Then I closed the drawer gently and turned off the light. I don't check their social media anymore. I don't read the gossip from distant cousins. I don't wonder if mom's still journaling or if dad's still lying to someone else. They're all background noise now, fading into static. Because family isn't blood, it's presence. It's who shows up when you're falling apart and who doesn't make you pay for being broken. The world they built without me collapsed the same way it was built, on borrowed support. And mine finally stands on its own. I used to think freedom meant running away. Now I know it's just staying gone. So when people ask about my family, where they live, what they're like, I tell them the truth in one sentence. They taught me how to stop mistaking pain for love. Then I smile, because that lesson finally was worth everything it cost.